present is a vast ocean of despair, filled with the terrors of a 21st century New World War and the intentional devastation of American cities and municipalities. Nowhere in the present does there lie the prospect for peace and progress. Peace and progress exists, but only among the minds of a few whose imaginations empower them to rise defiantly against the present circumstances and conceive what must be the future. The present holds before us the pathway of thermonuclear war. Its opponent is a concept for a true future, resting on the conversion of thermonuclear technology away from weapons towards the purposes of peace. That will be the defining theme of this week's LaRouchePAC in Action show. Ultimately, we cannot defeat the threat of a new world war without the presentation of a viable alternative. As the danger grew and shifted around the circumstances in Syria, the LaRouchePAC science team was deployed on presenting what the alternative must be: the thermonuclearization of the Trans-Pacific region. This concept is an upgrade to the NAWAPA 21 project referenced repeatedly on LaRouchePAC.com. The idea is simple. Take the most advanced form of technology currently available in weapons form and harness it, thermonuclear fusion, rather to provide electrical power for homes, to run water pumping stations and desalinate, for industries and agriculture. Ultimately, to transform the territory of the United States of America, improving our power to produce. A thermonuclear NAWAPA represents the image the United States needs to become, and the task before you, the audience, is to join us to fight against all obstacles and bring this future state about. As the heat around Syria was rising, some of the basic features of NAWAPA were presented during this past week's edition of the weekly report by Jason Ross of the LaRouchePAC basement team.
I suspect many of our viewers are familiar with this, but the NAWAPA proposal, the North American Water and Power Alliance, was a plan developed in the 1960s by a U.S. engineering firm to bring about a fourth or a fifth of the runoff in certain river basins in Alaska and Canada and bring it into the parched southwest of the United States, which would have the effect of, in some states, doubling the amount of irrigable land, or beyond, even more than doubling it, and providing a long-term security for our water supply and making us not dependent on the whims of the weather to be able to actually plan out whether we're going to have food. I mean, in many aspects of life, we do long-term planning. You know how long it might take to build a bridge. You know how long it might take to build a power plant. But if the weather's bad, you don't have any food. And that doesn't really show the kind of independence and self-determination that we ought to have as a species if we say, well, it rained too much and now we're going to starve.
Right.
So NAWAPA addresses that.
This really demonstrates the other point of Vernadsky, that man is a geological force in this sense, that we are in fact shaping the entire geography and biosphere of the planet to our will.
Mm-hmm. Already, if you compare the order of material, like just physical mass that's moved by volcanoes, and you compare that to what we do with mining, we're already on that level. I mean, we are as much a geological force as volcanoes. We're certainly beyond erosion,
right.
Wind blowing on a rock and pushing some dust off of it. We're a force. I mean, we ourselves, by the power of our minds, we're a force of nature, just like a volcano, or the way magnetism works. We are one of those.
This project would put millions upon millions back into high-paying employment, and its consequences, as clearly illustrated, would improve the nation's territory via power, transportation, and increases in the overall productive powers of labor. The key to getting NAWAPA, however, requires the elimination of Wall Street. Despite popular belief, we do not lack money per se to fund the project, but our biggest foe is the present system of finances has been invaded by a parasite. J.P. Morgan, Citibank, Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs must be eliminated and bankrupted. Glass-Steagall, the 1933 FDR-era law, is our weapon to bankrupt those worthless, immoral institutions. Bills to enact the law, as some may be informed, have been introduced into the federal House and Senate and should be supported, voted, and passed immediately. Part of the effort to garner winning support for the measure has been LaRouchePAC's intervention into state governments. The heat grew dramatically this past week over the introduction of a Glass-Steagall resolution that was introduced into the California state legislature, a significant state that forced Wall Street to crawl out of their snake holes against the resolution.
And so what we've got in Sacramento is a very interesting situation. Most of the members of Sacramento and most of the California political process has become so degenerate since this countercultural takeover. Since the 1960s, late 60s, and 70s, this place has become drug-infested, it's become bleached, it's become confused and disoriented by bizarre single-issue political fights, and the green agenda of total shutdown of industry, shutdown of farmland. And so the people there have a kind of a bleached Hollywood perspective of most things. But there are some people that can still fight and can think. And we've got two of them, a Democrat from Los Angeles and a Republican from Orange County. The Democrat sits on the Labor Committee. The Republican is a Tea Party type. And they both recognize that there is a clear fight right now across the country. The two staffers that we're working with are both 29 years old, the same age as Edward Snowden. They recognize that the bankers are absolutely panicked, and they're enjoying watching what's happening. So the bill was issued August 5th. Within a week, 10 bankers went to the first co-sponsor, who was a Democrat from the East Bay. It's kind of the Lawrence Livermore engineering area. And she was told by the bankers, 10 of them in $10,000 suits, and you got $100,000 worth of suits in the room saying, look, we don't ask for much, but what we ask for, we expect. And so, of course, she obliges because she thinks that it's going to be in her interest for her political career to work with these guys. Wrong conception. It will be, if we survive Obama's threat of nuclear war, that will be the death knell of her career because she compromised her population for these financial interests, which are killing the population. So she took her name off. Within a week of that, the resolution was amended, and the principal co-author, the Republican from Orange County, Mansour, signed on. And within 3 days of that being publicly announced, the bankers were in his office, 3 of them. The California Bankers Association, which led the last intervention, J.P. Morgan State Government Affairs Director, and a key lobby group for Wall Street financial institutions. At the same time, as they intervened on the first co-sponsor who removed her name, they also issued a letter. And that letter is about how we don't support the resolution. And they say a couple of things. They say, if Glass-Steagall wasn't repealed, the economic recovery that you're currently enjoying, this great recovery, which all they mean is a new stock market bubble, would have been slowed down or would have been prevented if Glass-Steagall had not been repealed. That the repeal of Glass-Steagall is what gave you this current economic recovery. Nobody would buy that but a sold-out compromised politician. So they also say, but now we've got Dodd-Frank and you're protected. But what's their real argument? Well, the real argument comes out in the first 3 paragraphs. The first sentence of each paragraph says, just so you know, this is a Lyndon LaRouche organization resolution. Oh, by the way, in case you didn't catch it in the first time we said it, this is a Lyndon LaRouche organization policy. And again, we want to make sure you know that this is Lyndon LaRouche. That's the same thing they said when they walked into the second co-sponsor's office, the principal co-author. You know this is a Lyndon LaRouche organization policy, right? That didn't get anywhere with that office because, frankly, he feels insulted. He says, so all I do is follow LaRouche? That's what you're saying? You think that I'm a person that just does whatever LaRouche says? And all of his Republican colleagues seem to think the same thing. They seem to think that you walk into a room and say, hey, you're with LaRouche, right? What, so I have no mind? I didn't think this through? 75 members of Congress, 10 members of the Senate, 24 different state legislators from 24 different states, maybe really hundreds of legislators from 24 different states, all have signed on to this. Major financial economists, bankers, labor unions, Tea Party groups have all endorsed this, and somehow if I sign this thing, I'm with Lyndon LaRouche, because they know that the only option they have is to somehow disparage, to try to intimidate people's sense of responsibility, and to break them from working with Lynn. Because if people have the guts to fight for what's true right now, that's going to put them in the LaRouche camp, because Lynn has defined this victory. And so the bankers left the office without much effect. The effect they left was the slime that their Rolex watches left, when they left the room, and these $7,000 shoes, with very little humility. And they came back and they had to apologize. They said, look, we didn't really mean to say that the resolution lies. All we meant to say was that, you disparaged, you didn't attack our former CEO, but you say that Sandy Weil was involved in the repeal of Glass-Steagall and led the repeal of Glass-Steagall, and now he's calling for its return, its reenactment. So we just wanted to make sure you guys knew that. We weren't trying to lie or manipulate you. My God, you guys are desperate. Your whole camp is breaking apart. The people that led the fight to repeal Glass-Steagall has left, and you guys are in here trying to bully people and intimidate them and back them away from a sense of moral responsibility. The irony is that then members of his own Republican Party come down to his office the same day and say, you with LaRouche. Staffers are calling staffers saying, you guys, you're with LaRouche, right? So it's clear. And if if that's their tactic, if that's what they want to do, I don't know how many more co-sponsors we're going to get in California. The session ends September 13th. A lot of people have been told in the Democratic Party this is not Obama's policy. You are not going to be with LaRouche, because LaRouche is the key opponent to Obama. He's the key figure calling for impeachment. So they've been told to back off. The Republican Party in California has compromised for way too long, like they did with Schwarzenegger in the Green Agenda. But we have two principled fighters. And what these two guys represent, and their staff, who have been crucial in this process, is the principle of classical chorus, because they are driving the financial institutions crazy. And if there's anything people can gather from this situation in Sacramento, is two things. One, if you want to save mankind, join with LaRouche, because he's the one out front defining the path to victory. And we've got a fight right now that we can win and establish a new paradigm for mankind. The second thing is that it's not going to take a majority of people, a small minority who have the dignity and courage to stand up on principle, can rattle the foundations of this current criminal system. And we can bring this thing down with a small minority who are committed to principle. So that's the fight right now. And I think the fight's got to be brought to Sacramento, but it's got to be brought directly to Washington, D.C. We've got a week or 10 days to make sure that Obama's war is stopped and that he's impeached. But that's the situation in Sacramento over the course of the last 5 or 6 weeks.
Reinstating Glass-Steagall sets the road straight for the coming of the much-needed construction of the thermonuclear NWAPA. This concrete view of the future was the secret behind LPAC's effectiveness in rallying behind defeating the effort for military action of the U.S. into Syria. The only effective anti-war movement is accomplished by a movement committed to economic progress. Not at all different in principle to the genius of First Secretary Alexander Hamilton, who saved the 13 colonies after the Revolutionary War with his insight for establishing a strong central government with the power to enact his crucial policy for developing domestic manufacturing and scientific innovation. That was our ultimate success against the British Empire. With this view, LPAC activists effectively deployed to obstruct Barack Obama's intent to launch missile strikes into Syria. The greater shift first occurred when the British Parliament voted a majority 285 to defeat Cameron and demand that no royal prerogative be invoked as a means of attacking Syria. Obama was now in a trap, and as of Saturday, forced to make a statement that he will seek the approval of Congress and not strike under his own will.
The chairman of the Joint Chiefs has informed me that we are prepared to strike whenever we choose. Moreover, the chairman has indicated to me that our capacity to execute this mission is not time sensitive. It will be effective tomorrow or next week or 1 month from now. And I'm prepared to give that order. But having made my decision as Commander-in-Chief based on what I am convinced is our national security interests, I'm also mindful that I'm the president of the world's oldest constitutional democracy. I've long believed that our power is rooted not just in our military might, but in our example as a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And that's why I've made a second decision. I will seek authorization for the use of force from the American people's representatives in Congress.
Ultimately, his impeachment or indictment is what is required to secure us from his madness. Now, at the outbreak of the serious situation, Diane Sayer, member of the LaRouche Policy Committee, scheduled to release a message on the topic of 9/11, which gets at the heart of the same terrorist infrastructure Saudi Arabia and Britain, with U.S. complicity, are backing in the Syrian conflict. She illustrated the anomaly that occurred.
I am running as an independent candidate for governor, and since New Jersey lost about 700 people on September 11th, and Governor Christie doesn't seem all that interested in getting to the bottom of who was behind that, particularly what's been covered up by Bush and now Obama, which is the role of the Saudis and the deal between the Saudis and the British, and the 28 pages which have been identified by former Senator Bob Graham from the 9/11 Joint Congressional Inquiry. So I decided, given that we're approaching the anniversary of the September 11th attacks, the one-year anniversary of the attacks on Benghazi, it's high time that the cover-up stop. And I want to know why Governor Christie, since he's the governor of New Jersey, hasn't been hot on the track of these 28 pages. So what I did was my campaign purchased 16 radio ad spots, a 1-minute ad, where I simply make the case that the role of the Saudis in funding 9/11 has been covered up. There's 28 pages that need to be released. Any sane governor of New Jersey, which lost 700 people in these attacks and had 11 of the hijackers going through Patterson, would want to know what happened. And we paid 5 radio stations to put these 16 spots on the air, and discovered the day after all of the ads were supposed to come on that not one single one of the stations had run my ad. One of them actually did run it, it turns out. They ran it an hour later. They didn't run it at the time that we paid for. And then another station had run a different ad. They ran an ad that I sent them a month ago about the Glass-Steagall Act, which is fine. That's certainly a relevant topic. But they didn't run my ad about 9/11. So I put out a press release asking who would want to block my ad. Could it possibly be Governor Christie? And we got that release out, and literally within minutes of the release having been sent, we got the radio stations contacting us. And I can say the New York stations both did run the correct ad this week on afternoon rush hour time, and we'll see what happens in New Jersey. 13 of my advertisements are scheduled to run on 3 Jersey Shore stations this week, actually 4 of them today and 4 of them tomorrow. So that's where it stands, but I think they didn't want my ads coming out last week, because last week was the week of the turning point to try and get Obama to launch this insane war policy on Syria, and they didn't want to remind the American people that this Obama is working with the Saudis on this, and the Saudis funded 9/11. So I think that's why the ad was blocked. And so far this week it has been being broadcast. We'll know more on Monday.
Later in the week, a statement denouncing the effort for a so-called limited strike into Syria was put forth by Lyndon LaRouche and deployed the following day, Friday, into the nation's capital.
Hello, this is Alicia Saratani reporting from Washington, D.C. Today is Friday, August 30th, and this morning teams of LaRouchePAC organizers deployed to key metro stops throughout the city to get out Mr. LaRouche's warning that any military engagement in Syria would ultimately lead to a thermonuclear war, a global thermonuclear war. Now, in discussions with Mr. LaRouche last night, he emphasized that what Obama continues to do with Syria is less and less popular with more and more people throughout the United States and throughout the planet. And he stressed that the number one priority still is in making sure that a military strike does not happen because the consequences would be a disaster. And what Mr. LaRouche also said is that people should look at this as an opportunity because Obama is crazy enough to launch military strikes. He may do it by himself. We have the profile on him. Mr. LaRouche warned that this is the kind of mentality of this guy from 2009. But because the momentum around the disgust of this administration is across the board what it is, this particular situation is an incredible opportunity to get him out of office. Everyone's already discussing that any strikes on Syria would, number one, be a violation of international law. And number two, without the consent of Congress, not just consulting with Congress, but without the consent of Congress, it's unconstitutional. And if the president isn't removed on those grounds, then you can kiss the United States goodbye. And that puts the rest of the world and major nations like Russia and China in a very difficult position because where's the rule of law if it's not enforced from the United States? So that's our job here. Over the weekend, there's a lot of things that are going to happen. Tomorrow will be a very interesting day. Military strikes could happen as early as tomorrow. So stay tuned to the LaRouchePAC site. Talk to your Congress people. Mobilize what you can. This can absolutely be stopped, and Obama could absolutely be impeached for this. So stay tuned, and we'll see you soon.
We know that London and others have been involved in gun-running operations and stuff of that nature. Benghazi is an issue that will not go away. That's right. It is going to be... Frank Wolf has a resolution in Congress as we speak to have a full select committee investigate this thing thoroughly. We know so far that there was gun-running operations going on into Syria to the rebels. Al-Nusra, which is an Al-Qaeda affiliate, is part of the Syrian opposition. Now, come to the question that I want on this directly. If Obama launches war in Syria without Congress's approval, will you impeach him?
Well,
say something because I find this whole discussion to be totally disgusting. I find it to be totally disgusting. The whole financial system is coming down. The drug trade is explicitly funded by the banks themselves, which you've gotten $250,000 from these guys. You were campaigning on Glass-Steagall to restore it, and that would shut down the drug trade. This whole thing wouldn't even have come up if we had shut down the drug trade, if we passed Glass-Steagall. We are now funding through the protection of drugs into Al-Qaeda. We're funding. That's how these guys are getting their money. And we're legalizing it. We're destroying the minds of my generation. We're destroying the minds of our young people. This is crazy. Why are we allowing this to happen? And the fact that we're having a discussion about it as if it's something funny or if it's something that it's legitimate to talk about is completely nuts. And I mean, honestly, if we don't seriously think about the situation that we're in right now, that we're facing the worst collapse that mankind's ever seen. Farms are being shut down all across the country. They're losing their water rights, right? We're going into hyperinflation. We're about to go into war in Syria, which is also about to get us into war into Russia. Israel's attacking Syria. And we're funding that through what we're talking about here today, through drug legalization. That money is going to Al-Qaeda, which we're directly funding over there right now. So I have to just say, I mean, either we get through Glass-Steagall now and shut down this whole discussion about drug legalization, about how's the money this could help the revenue of the economy? It's like, no, we need industry. We need manufacturing.
We need hemp.
No, we need to educate our young people on how
We're
to
doing
think.
right now.
Thank you. No, listen, we have, thank you. You made your point.
HR 129, you campaigned on it.
I appreciate your presence and I appreciate.
Throughout the country, our effort in Washington, D.C. was backed by a series of interventions at town hall meetings where federal lawmakers were challenged directly in public. But as was said in the beginning, the driver for our effort to obstruct the effort for war was our determination for the future, to build the most massive, most ambitious project human civilization has yet to see. Not only is it our constitutional duty, it is our moral prerogative that we do so. Man is a creature of reason, destined to ornament the universe of the Almighty Creator. He was instructed at the outset to multiply and subdue the earth. He was given the breath of life to conquer the lands and make his territory suitable for posterity. Man is to be immortal, and so we can be by building today what will remain a living benefit for infinite tomorrows. Join the fight.